the recording started, just to me, and then kind of pick up where we left off. So we talked about public goods last class and kind of this idea of the free rider problem. So today we'll kind of talk a little bit about common resources. So common resources, if we recall, we could go back in last class and look, were basically goods that were non-excludable, so everyone could use them, but they were rival. So, right, once someone consumes that good, no one else can consume it. The best, I think the best examples of these are usually common resources are like natural resources. So I think about, deer or a fish in a pond or any type of thing that has like a limited supply. So you could even break this down to like fossil fuels and gold or whatever it is, right? So if someone finds gold in the earth, they can take it, right? That's why people used to go mining for gold. The problem is it's a rival in the sense that once you have the gold you found, no one else can you consume that. No one else can derive benefit from that unless you decide, to sell to them or something. But in terms of just ownership, right? So, we have a common problem like with common resources that there's a lot of free riders, right? It's just the difference is the free rider issue has kind of this negative externality. So for the private individual, right, there's always benefit to, consuming more of the fish from the pond. However, we know if populations in that pond get below a certain amount, the fish won't replenish, right? And it's a huge cost for society, but the individual doesn't necessarily kind of bear that cost while they're making their decision of whether or not they should kind of continue to fish, right? Now, if any one person, right, fishes in a pond or to the ocean, they're not going to, eliminate a fish population so that it can't replenish itself. However, let's say that for every individual, right, their own private benefits and costs, they want to consume, I don't know, something like 4 fish, right? Well, if everybody consumes 4 fish, it would wipe out the fish population and be this huge negative externality for society, right? It's have huge negative cost, okay? And maybe the optimal number is for every single person to only get 2 fish. That way the fish population can kind of keep replenishing itself and we have fish year after year after year, okay? But because every individual has the same incentive to fish a little bit more, we can end up where everybody overfishes and we end up kind of killing this fish population, okay? So, just like we said with public goods, this could potentially mean that the private citizens get to an outcome that's inefficient. Now with public goods, we said that the quantity was actually too low, right? If we allowed individuals to make their own decisions, so we need government to come step in, maybe get some taxes to be able to purchase these public goods and get to that higher socially efficient quantity. With common resources, is the exact opposite, right? We're going to have people overfish. We're going to have people over harvest trees, right, for paper, things like that. So we actually, if we allow the markets to do what they want to do, we actually end up with, you can kind of think about it as, blow this up. So as I'm talking, we can talk through it, right? What I'm actually going to end up with is that the equilibrium quantity that the market gets to is actually going to be greater than that socially efficient quantity that we said was optimal. Okay. So we need government to come step in and maybe limit the use of this good, right? Maybe saying you give out something like during wartime, right, when we know that we didn't want people to use as many products that had rubber and things like that. We kind of gave quotas, right? How much that someone could consume. So I've kind of given a couple of these examples, right? We talked about last class, right? It would be like a congested non-toll road. A non-toll road is non-excludable, everyone can use it. But if it's congested, me getting on that road prevents other people from getting on and enjoying the benefits of that road as well, right? So, air and water, a lot of times we think about kind of the clean air and clean water. It's not at a social efficient quantity, right? Pollution is too high essentially, right? So we want to try to limit pollution. And then fish, whales, other wildlife, we overconsume some of those if we allow individuals to make their own decisions, which is why they give away things like deer tags or you have to get fishing licenses, right? Because they don't want it to be over kind of fished or overhunted. So the tragedy of the commons is kind of like this free rider. Let's see, make sure. Okay, so we got a couple people. So if you have questions anytime, feel free to kind of unmute yourself, interrupt. I just kind of, whenever everyone comes in, I have it set so that you're muted. So this tragedy of the commons is basically this idea that if we allow people to make their own decisions, they're going to overhunt, they're going to overfish or overuse these common resources. Okay, and there's huge negative externalities to them doing this, and so it costs society a lot. Right? So we've got a good example here. I think it's on, all right, yeah, bluefin tuna. All right, so every company has an incentive to catch as many fish as possible, but if they all catch as many as possible, it kills out the bluefin tuna population. So I'll come back to this slide in a second. I know I've got a, there we go. So this is kind of a nice little graph that kind of shows, here's the benefits to an individual. And so we're thinking about here kind of, let's say we had some company, right? This fishing company, bluefin tuna, and then we say, okay, what's the benefit to us from putting more boats out on the ocean to fish these bluefin tuna? Well, for them, and this is kind of an easy example, we keep marginal cost constant. So for the company where marginal cost is equal to marginal benefit, this would be kind of where they would produce up to that point, or the number of boats they would put on the ocean would be 8 here. So even if this wasn't the same company, maybe these are like each boat represents like a different company. So if you want to think about it that way, that's fine as well. But basically the free market equilibrium point we'll get to is where the marginal cost of the last boat added is the same as the marginal benefit. Right? We'll go up to that many boats on the ocean. So the problem is at every single additional boat that's put in the ocean, right, there's less of this resource fish, or there's less of this resource out there, and it's less likely they can repopulate themselves. So there's a cost, right, that's kind of being added as I put more and more boats out. Right? So for society, the marginal benefits are going to be a little bit lower, right? Because it's the existing marginal benefits, but there's kind of this, as the companies put out more boats, this is worse for kind of society as a whole. So the marginal social benefit is going to be a little bit lower than the marginal benefits. Okay. So, usually we're thinking about when we had negative externalities, we think about it like as an additional cost. But here we're thinking about it as it's kind of detracting from the social benefit. So now for society, the optimal point, where does marginal social benefit hit the marginal cost curve? And for costs, we assume that the private cost is the same as social cost here. We don't have any other externalities going on. That the equilibrium point would be for there to only be 4 boats. So here, that socially efficient quantity, right, or the quantity that we would get to from using that marginal social benefit curve is going to be much lower than the quantity that the free market would choose, or the quantity chosen just simply based off of the private marginal benefits. So you can kind of put these numbers, or take this graph and put it in numbers as well. And maybe this is a different way of looking at it, but it kind of makes sense. So from here, right, every boat, right, had kind of the, if I have one boat, kind of go up here, what would the average catch per boat be? If I had 2 boats, what would the average catch per boat be? So I could look at the averages. Since I know the quantities, I can back out my totals. And then once I have the totals, we could determine what the marginal catch is, right? It would just be the change in the number of fish caught divided by the change in the number of, here quantity, it's the number of boats, right? Now we're going up by 1 boat, so that makes it kind of easy, right? Remember we said, anytime we're thinking about something on the margin, it's going to be, so if we want the marginal catch here, it's just the change in the total, so change in total catch from a change in quantity. Well, here, our quantity was the change in the quantity of boats we had out in this ocean. So if we look at these numbers, I was just grabbing that average catch from the graph. You can kind of see here that initially, as we start adding boats, well, it makes sense. Like this is a fixed resource. So if there's only 1 boat, right, they can catch a lot of fish. But as we add more, this kind of fixed resource is split up across more boats. So that average catch is declining, right, as I'm adding more and more boats. So you also can kind of notice initially my total catch starts going up pretty quick. So from 0 to one boat, it's 100, right? So my marginal catch of that first boat, it added 100 additional fish. The second boat, going from first to the second boat, increased the total catch on this ocean up to 180. So there, the marginal catch was 80. We would kind of keep doing that, right? Then it goes up by 70, then 50, then it goes down by 50 once I start adding a fifth boat. Right? So this marginal catch declining, right, really is reflecting that now this starts to be bad for society. Now notice for the boats, right, even though, for any one boat, there's still a positive amount, right? The average catch per boat from 5 to 8, these are still positive values. So as the company, or as more additional people are deciding to put their boat and fish for bluefin tuna, there's still incentives to them, right? These benefits, or the catch per boat they're getting, is still, above zero, right? Or and even here, it's still above the marginal cost. Okay? So we kind of can see that, for these negative values, this is actually where it's going to be. The marginal catch for society starts to be negative, right? This is actually going to be right past that point that society would have liked the boats to stop at, right? I go past this quantity of 4 and go to that fifth boat. Well, now I start to see that the social benefits, right, or the kind of change in the total catch starts to go down, right? It started to decline. But for the private individuals, for the boats, right, it was still positive. Okay. So that's one way of looking at it. So we'll go back here because I skipped over this a little bit. Some other examples that we have, like I think this fishing one makes sense, but another one is like common land that's used for cattle, like to graze. Now the problem is there's incentive for every farmer to use that land, but if they don't limit how much their cattle graze on it, and everyone doesn't limit how much their cattle grazes, they basically turn it into dirt, right? They eat so much of it that it becomes dirt again, and now we don't have this common resource for the moving forward for society to enjoy. Okay? So we see that's a pretty good example. So how can we do this? We can regulate it. We can impose corrective taxes so that people internalize this negative externality. Because really, right, if we're thinking about here, now we usually don't think about, usually the way we've talked about taxes, they're always first imposed on the producers, right? But you can tax, right? We also kind of go way, way back. I know that I showed you how it doesn't really matter if we tax producers or consumers, it has the same effect or the same end result. So here, instead of taxing the producers, what you could do is tax, and they'll notice I'm not taxing the producers. They eventually turn around and sell the fish, so then they do become producers. But in terms of the use of the good, the consumers of it, right, these boats who are kind of consuming those fish, catching these fish, I could basically impose a tax on them, and then instead of a shift in the supply curve, it would just be shifting that marginal benefit, right? It would just be like adding a cost, so the marginal benefit would fall. So by imposing that tax on these boats, right, maybe I say if you want to have a boat and fish in this ocean, you need some type of license, and it costs quite a bit of money. So whatever the benefit to fishing on that ocean would be before, it's now that benefit, but minus that tax. Right? So let's maybe think about how this would look. I'm going to draw this out here. So let's say maybe we didn't have a boating example. We've got some other good, some other common resource, right? And I think about the demand to consume that good, representing that marginal benefit. We could keep, we don't have to have a constant marginal cost like I did in the other example. We could have this increasing supply curve. If I use a tax on consumers, because maybe I know that for society, their marginal social benefit is somewhere down here, right? So the quantity that would be socially efficient isn't the quantity you kind of think about here that the free market arrives at. So how can I push that quantity that the market arrives at down to the socially efficient point? Well, if I start taking this marginal benefit, right, and then I add this tax, then basically the benefit is whatever it was before minus the tax. So that starts to kind of decrease that marginal benefit or decrease that demand curve all the way down to the point where we can get it to match up with whatever society's marginal benefit is. So that's the idea of how you could use a tax on consumers to kind of push the use of that good down. Right? And we typically think about they do this for goods that they don't want us to use, like any type of drug or alcohol. Alcohol is not, I think, directly taxed. I think it's more on the producer. But in terms of like cigarettes, right, there are cigarette taxes on that you're kind of paying or that they put on the consumer. So that's one way we could deal with the overuse of these common resources, kind of making people internalize, right, these additional costs. Right? We see this in other areas as well. So the Communications Commission, they auction off permits to use. I think that one's related to like open airwaves and things on the radio. But we also can think about another type of regulation. Right? So we said before, common resources are non-excludable, so people can't use them, but they are rival. So when someone uses it, other people can't. So how could we turn this into a private good? So private goods, we said, were non-rival and non-excludable, or sorry, I messed that up bad. So private goods, we say they are rival and they're excludable. So if we've got a common resource, which is rival and non-excludable, how do we make it excludable, right? Well, that would basically be taking land and then like selling it off to be private ownership, right? So dividing it up into parcels and selling it. So instead of having this common grazing land, we parcel it up, sell it off, and give people rights to it, and that way it becomes excludable. Right? So this is another way of, other than taxes, of dealing with this problem of overuse. You can also establish property rights to things. So once again, you're trying to make this common resource excludable to make it more like a private good, because then everyone internalizes all the costs and all the benefits as opposed to before. So, we do this with like hunting and fishing licenses, right? So the people who, you kind of think about it as, if I had this graph, if I basically make their licenses and like that, it was like adding taxes, right? It was like decreasing that marginal benefit curve. So the people who didn't value using this common resource, once this starts shifting down, they get kind of driven out of the market. While the people who valued it a lot, even with that added tax, they're still going to decide to consume this common resource. So that's another way we can do that, is charging these licenses or these fees, entrance fees to national parks. That way, the people who value it the most are still going to decide to go. The people who didn't, well, they will no longer go. We can drive that quantity back down closer to that efficient point. Okay. So adding in taxes, adding in fees, licenses, anything like that, it kind of pushes that private demand curve down to match up with that marginal social benefit curve. Now you could just go in and set quotas. That's also another way of doing it, right? Instead of making people internalize it, you could just say, look, we are only going to allow there to be 5 boats and fish this ocean, right? And that way you can get the optimal quantity of boats you want. Another good example off the top of my head I just thought of, you see some societies do this. So in college towns, if you have like a main strip or a drag, or not even college town necessarily, but some towns don't want too many like bars and things open on the main drag, right? They think that it'll lead to a bunch of too many drunk people, too much attract the wrong type of people they don't want in their town, in terms of like people that are to come down and maybe pick fights or aren't going to treat the public spaces as well. So because they want to prevent there from being this huge bar scene, potentially, they'll limit the number of liquor licenses they sell, right? So they know that if they allow the market to get to decide that they'll get to a quantity of bars and establishments that serve alcohol downtown, that's too high, right? That's higher than they think is optimal for society. So what they do is they just set a quota in the number of licenses they give out, and they can kind of push it back down, right? Instead of pushing the marginal benefit curve down, they just say, okay, we're gonna only allow this many licenses, right, for selling liquor. So it's another kind of mechanism we can use to deal with common resources. And we already talked about taxes. Excuse me. So let's start to just kind of work through a few examples, thinking about kind of how we would regulate. Now, I have clickers here. Obviously, we're not using the clickers. This is just a recorded video, but you should be able to go back through and kind of understand why the correct answers are what they are. So what kind of good, if we're thinking about private goods, common resources, natural monopolies, or public goods, describes a market for whales, I guess, and what outcome would an unregulated market arrive at? So kind of talking today about a lot. So hopefully this is an easy one. Like if we're talking about the fishing of whales, right, then we know that it's a common resource, right? It's non-excludable. Anyone that can build a boat can go out with his boat and fish or go whaling. So it's non-excludable. However, it's rival in that once someone catches a whale, right, no one else can catch that whale. Okay? So we would say that they're a common resource. And we know that if we allow for a common resource because it's non-excludable, and there's this additional cost to society that the private individual isn't factoring in, we said that the quantity used, or the quantity we see a free market arrive at, is going to be greater than what we would like as society, right? So we're going to consume too many whales, right? The quantity is going to be higher than what is socially efficient. Now, we're talking about the price. We can also think about if we did want to compare that. I don't think I did before, right? We said the socially efficient quantity is lower than what the market arrives at, and kind of the price that the market arrives at is greater than the price that society would like to see set. Okay. All right, so that was our common resource, right? We overuse it, right? And then the price is kind of set too high. All right. Well, consume too many whales. So, excuse me. I think the mailman just got here. All right, so what kind of good would best describe a mosquito abatement program? So this is where you can spray for mosquitoes, but right, think about if we had not the government providing this, but if private individuals made this decision, right? Well, once they spray an area, right, down with this mosquito repellent stuff, it's non-rival in the sense that we all can enjoy it, right? It's also non-excludable. Once it's provided, like once someone purchases it, we can't prevent other people from enjoying the fact that that spray helped kill a bunch of mosquitoes. So, maybe, right, for most of us, we would not find it optimal to pay for this mosquito abatement or this, them spraying down the entire town, right? We don't value enough that we would individually just pay for it all on our own. Maybe there's like a millionaire that maybe would provide it, right? But once that millionaire provides it, we all get to enjoy the benefit of it, right? Because now the mosquitoes are all dead. So we would say it's non-excludable because once that millionaire pays for it, he can't exclude people from enjoying the benefits. We can all enjoy the benefits at the same time of not having mosquitoes. So we'd say this is a public good. But if we allow individuals to make this decision, right, maybe there's only one person who's going to pay for it, right? So we would say that we consume way too little, right? Because there's huge benefits. If we add up the benefits to every single citizen, then the benefit of this mosquito abatement is huge. But no one person, even probably a millionaire, values it enough that where they will individually pay for it. So we get this quantity that's too low, right? And then the price is going to be kind of higher than what would be optimal. So kind of they're really on these public goods common resources when it comes to the exams, really just going to kind of be focusing on the quantity there. I mentioned the prices here, but ultimately we're just worrying about the quantity. So for common resources, we get a quantity consumed over the social efficient point. For public goods, we see the quantity consumed be less than the socially efficient point. Then if we use KFC double downs, which I don't know if they still have these, remember when they announced this is just like the wildest idea of a sandwich to me, but right, what type of good would this be? Well, once someone purchases and eats it, no one else can use it, right? So it's very rival, right? I guess maybe you could argue you could split it with someone, but even if you split it with someone, right, once the two of you consume it, no one else can. So it's rival in that sense. It's excludable in that once I buy it, like no one else has rights to just grab it out of my hand and eat it, right? So we would say it's rival, it's excludable. That would be our typical private good. And for these private goods, we believe that the free market typically arrives kind of at that optimal price and quantity, unless we have some additional positive and negative externalities that enter into the equation. Okay. So kind of the summary of all this, right? Public goods are going to be underprovided, while common resources are going to be overused, right? And one way in which we can push either public goods towards their socially efficient quantity, so increase the amount consumed, or decrease the amount consumed of common resources to push it closer to the social efficient point for society, right? Usually it's going to be some type of taxes or subsidies or quotas, right? The government's going to have to step in, and ultimately we would like for them to do it in a way in which they make people internalize these additional costs and benefits as opposed to just setting quotas. But all of them are ways in which we can arrive at those socially efficient quantities. Okay. I think that should be it. So what I will get up this afternoon, right, is, I guess I could put myself on, but I posted the homework assignment. So the 5th homework assignment is up there on Canvas as well on Pearson. You can start working on that. I think it's about 21 questions. I have it set to be due, I believe, the Friday, or no, I think I had it set as far as the Wednesday, not of the first week of return, but the following week. So I would try to get that done early though, because I may put up one final small assignment to kind of help you in studying the last 2 weeks of content that we go over. So when I comes to that point, we'll talk a little bit more about what that 6th assignment would look like. But I want you to try to get this 5th one done as soon as possible. I will kind of extend the time out though for the due date, just in case though people, I know, schedules get kind of busy and crazy here towards the end of the semester. So we'll have that assignment. I'll get a batch of practice problems put up for the externalities and the different types of goods that we've been talking about the last couple of weeks. So you'll have that set of practice problems for the final. And then I'll have a final set of practice problems that'll go over stuff that we cover in those final 2 weeks after return from break. Okay. All right. So if there's no questions from the 2 people here, I'm gonna end the recording here, get this posted.